I just did. Karen, will you Slack Sean the correct info?
Yep.
Hi, everybody. Welcome. We'll be getting started in a minute. Our data scientist is having trouble logging on, though. So really, until he gets here, there's nothing I can say of interest. Is that Sean?
I'm going to message him and see. And if it is, I might be able to make him a.
Yeah, you can promote him to panelist.
Yeah. Okay, you said that's me, so hang on. Just so many people joining. Promote to panelist.
Hello.
Welcome, Sean.
Hello, Sean.
Hey. How are you guys?
Great.
Well.
We are still having people coming in a pretty rapid clip, so we'll give it a minute before we start.
Good. How many are we thinking?
So there were 150 registrants, Jen?
Yep. And everybody can see and hear you right now. So just FYI.
A bunch. I won't
Yeah,
say-
this is so thank you everybody for being here. Like I said, we'll get started in a minute. This was our highest registration for a webinar ever. I think that people are really interested in data and how to use data. And Sean has put together a really great presentation for today. And I'm really excited to share this with everybody. Let's give it just one more minute. Okay, and I'm going to share my screen. This is always the dicey part where we find out how much I can use technology.
Stuck the landing there, Jen.
At least I didn't hang up on the webinar this time. Great. Well, why don't we go ahead and get started. So thank you everybody for being here. Our webinar topic today is, of course, data for storytelling. One thing that has been really exciting to see is how we've been able to use data both at 412 Food Rescue and at our Food Rescue Hero partners, and leverage that to really both improve our operations, increase our efficiency in our operations, as well as tell that story of that impact to our donors, our food donors, our recipient partnerships, and other community partners. We have joining us today, Sean Hudson, who is the data scientist at Food Rescue Hero. And I can't remember his actual title, but he's a data scientist, so we'll just call him that for today. And he's going to talk to us about data, what it is, how to gather it, how to use it, And then I will end up with how to use it to tell a story. If you have questions, if you can hold them to the end, we'll do some question and answer at the end.
Well, actually, just to amend that, just drop the questions in the Q&A, and then we'll get to those at the end.
Great.
But so you don't lose your train of thought.
Perfect. And if you could just make sure that all of that is working for folks, Jake, that would be great, because I know sometimes it's disabled.
Yep. Let me know if it's not. If anybody tries to drop a question in there, let me know if it's not.
All right. So Sean, take it away.
Yeah, so I'm Sean. Generally introduced me. I'm the data scientist at 412 Food Rescue, Food Rescue Hero. So any data products that come out of that, I'm attached to in some way. And I'm really excited to be here. So thank you. So yeah, basically we'll get started with a few things. We're gonna keep this kind of as broad an audience as possible. So we're not gonna get super in depth on some of this, but we're gonna get started on like some of the best things we can do for reporting, right? So first up, what is data? Data is just information, right? And there's a lot of different kinds that you can see. Some of them are in reports, and some of them are just like, what's in your head, the books you read, everything in it is data, because it's just the information that you're absorbing and ideally using. So broadly speaking, we've got our qualitative data, which is things like categories, descriptive information, demographics, observable things that are not, numbers, basically. And then your quantitative, which are your numbers, your measures, your counts, your values, your frequencies. Those are what you would quantify, right? Let's go to the next slide. So what can data tell us? A lot of stuff, right? Breaking out what we like to use data for are descriptive, predictive, and prescriptive. Descriptive is where everyone should start, right? Those are things like your reports and your impact statements. And after you use that information, you can leverage it to go further, right? With predictive analytics, so projections, the autocomplete that always like messes up your texts, that's a predictive methodology. And prescriptive, so now that we know what might happen, what should we do about it? So things that would highlight the best course of action given what you already know, right? And that's where our data-informed decisions come from. Limitations to data. When we talk about those three kind of stages, we really can't skip the steps. You can't predict what might happen without knowing what already happened, and you can't predict what you should do without knowing, like, the possible paths that things can go down. In addition to that, data is only going to be as good as the information you put into it, right? So your practices around data cleanliness, data accuracy, and consistency. The expression you hear a lot of times is garbage in, garbage out. So when if you put in bad information, the information you get out of it is going to be bad. So if you're building a predictive model or a projection, those projections will be bad if they are based on bad data. And you can only do so much if your data that you collect isn't optimized for what you need. Like, do you have all the fields of interest, and are you pulling it in a way that it is usable, right? So high quality and accurate data is worth the time investment. I'll try not to read off of the slides this much. Moving forward.
I just want to add, so a mistake that that I made in the beginning when we were just starting 412 Food Rescue is I was tracking things in a spreadsheet, so that was all good, but I wasn't using data validation. So I was spelling names differently, donors' names, nonprofit partners' names, volunteers' names. And so it meant that in order to get any usable information, I had to go in and really clean up all of those entries. So data validation is something super simple you can do in a Google Sheet. To make sure that you're not putting garbage into your spreadsheet that you're going to have to clean up later.
Clean up your duplicates, your spellings, all that kind of stuff. And at different levels of data maturity, you're going to find that different tools will become helpful. The more data you get, the more you'll realize how much you need these tools. It's actually hard to teach it, right? You kind of can't get good at it without being bad at it for a little bit. It takes that's even bad. It's just your practices develop and you grow into what you need to do. Yeah. So I talked a little bit about good data already. It means a lot of things, but the most important thing of that is consistency. So just like Jen was saying, when you have duplicates, when you have misspellings in your fields, what you end up seeing is, in our case, we'll have a whole bunch of donors that are actually the same person. So people donate, what amounts to hundreds of thousands of pounds of food, and it looks like, that it's coming from many different donors, and that gets tricky, right? When we're trying to tell a donor how much they gave to us, when it isn't consistent. So, maybe you only find one or two of the spellings and these numbers don't look right. So consistency, are these coming from the same place? Things like that.
Another great example here is if you are describing what is being donated, the food that's being donated. Again, I mean, data validation is an easy way to do it, but really think about how you're describing that and come up with a standard set of descriptors. Don't call it vegetables in one instance and produce in another. Pick one and stick with it.
Yeah, so and that goes into your qualitative data, right? These are your categories, the things you want in there, and you want to be consistent across them. And it's really, really hard to kind of overstate this, but the more mature an organization gets with its data, the fewer sources the data should be coming from. The more places it's coming from, the more you're going to have to do work around tidying and making formats fit together. Like, if you have one, a zip code could appear as an integer in one thing. In Pennsylvania, well, at least in the Pittsburgh area, most of them start with 1-5, so there's no leading zeros. So every system thinks that that's an integer, but it isn't, right? Because there's actually leading zeros in many zip codes, and it needs to be a character. So your data types across different things. The fewer sources you're pulling data from, the less you need to do to make them match.
And a really good example of this, I'm sorry to interrupt, Sean,
Fine.
would be if your volunteers are picking up the donations and they're reporting to you what they're picking up. If you give them free text to tell you what they're picking up, you're going to get, that's hundreds of different ways that's going to come in, versus if you have a form for them to fill out with restricted input, then you are minimizing the different ways that people are going to say the same thing.
Yeah, during the height of COVID at my last job, I was managing all of the surveys that we would get. I'm sure everyone remembers taking a COVID survey to go into an office at some point or another, and I would manage those, and you would not believe the number of ways people misspell their own first and last name. So it's it doesn't matter what you do, and people will, with the best intentions, just make silly little mistakes here and there, and when you're aggregating information, you run into problems. So fewer sources, reliable sources, automate everything you possibly can. If you can pull it as a query from a database, which is almost everything we do in the operations side of 412 Food Rescue, or even if you're using Google Sheets, that's completely fine. Data validation, use forms, try not to update those forms very often. Yeah, that kind of stuff. I mentioned the kind of 3 stages, and we're going to kind of focus on descriptive, or what happened, right? Most of the value that you're going to get from reporting is going to come from your simplest solution. So if you're working out of Sheets or out of Excel, or if you're unfortunate enough to be working out of Numbers on Mac, you can make a lot of times just simple pivot tables and visualizations, and they will answer like 90% of your questions, right? So a lot of what we're going to focus on, just for our examples, is going to be food delivered by zip code. And this just comes straight from our donor reports. So we pulled in locations, zip codes are part of that. So I just kind of turned things around and made a drag and drop pivot table that most of this data is going to come from. So all that really is just, zip code, name, location, and then it just summarizes the amount of food delivered. And you can use that to break it into any kind of time box that you want to, though. It's all pretty straightforward once you kind of get used to it. Google is your friend on these, and obviously we do info session. If you're in the Food Rescue Hero Network, we are always about coaching people.
Yep. Yeah, I was gonna say, for our existing partners, if you are not familiar with pivot tables, we can talk about those in any one of our meetings.
What helps us tell a story and helps us do other interesting things is taking data that we don't have, right? I know I talked about limiting your data sources. So the things in which you are generating data, you should have as few of those those should be coming from as few places as possible to make it easy to incorporate that external data. If you guys have external data sources that you like to use, go ahead and drop them in there. There's a lot of good ones. I know recently I used like some Bureau of Labor Statistics stuff. I used national gas prices for a few analyses, but there's lots of cool stuff you can do. So if there's any that you like, go ahead and use them. Everyone's favorite is going to be the census, especially at nonprofits. The census provides a lot of reliable, well curated data because it's very consistent year over year. There's a lot of statistical methods that are applied to the American Community Survey, which is probably the most. I don't use the decennial census as often as I use the community survey because it updates a lot more often,
Can you
obviously.
explain the difference between those two?
Yeah,
Folks that don't know?
the decennial census, by law, they don't use any statistical techniques on the outcomes of that. And obviously, most of you probably did this fairly recently. Ooh, I like that one, Consumer Price Index. Almost 3 years ago, most of you filled out the census form, and that's just a complete count of everyone in the US and territories. And it's just it asks a number of questions. Those results are compiled, tabulated, and shared to the entire country for things you might want to use it for. When you go down to really small, you're good. You go down to really small geographies like zip codes or tracts, that kind of stuff, you'll find that it gets censored. And the same is true for the American Community Survey, which is similar, asks a lot of similar questions, but slightly more of them. And it, I think, year to year tries to survey about 1% of the population. And it makes, maybe it's more, I don't know. It's a lot less people, and they use different statistical methods to kind of infer different things. So you'll see things like margin of error and stuff like that in the exports that you'll get from here, right? Which is a notoriously bad website to work with, but the census website, data.census.gov, will compile all that information for you. It's where it all lives now. It used to be American Fact Finder. If any of you have used that, that doesn't live anywhere anymore. I think the website is still up, but it will it's deprecated. It will never be updated again. The easiest way to find the data you're looking for is usually in the maps section. You go there and then find your geography. Everything we did in here is pulled from the census website. And that's all zip code tabulation area for what we are going to do. I'm rambling, you can tell me to slow down. I know I have a way of speaking that isn't a way of speaking. So yeah, pulling in that external data. What I pulled for this was pretty simple, right? I pulled in just a count of people in poverty by zip code. I mentioned that a lot of those zip codes are going to be, when there's few enough people in a geography, they'll censor it, so the data isn't available, so it'll return like NA. Fortunately, in the Pittsburgh area, that isn't very many. So in this case, we have a count of people in poverty for each of those, and I was able to line that up by zip code with the weight the year before last year, and the change in those. And that's just a big old table of every zip code we serve. So what you can do with that is also make charts, and I found that the easiest way to show relationships between variables is to just kind of plot them against each other, right? So there is your food delivered in pounds, people in poverty, and you see that there is a slight but significant upward trend in the count of people in poverty and the food delivered in pounds. What you probably notice are these, 5 observations that are pretty outside of that, right? They have a relatively low count of people in poverty, but a lot of tonnage. And we were actually Jen and I were looking into this today to see what was up with that. And that happens to be, almost all of those are the locations where our housing authority projects are. So that's where it's, and those are also small zip codes, so there aren't a lot of people in them. But the rate of poverty in those places is fairly high. So those are housing authorities. We move a lot of food to housing authorities. Actually, I think it's HACP is probably our biggest or second biggest recipient, right?
It is, although this was Allegheny County.
I'm sorry.
But I just want to talk for a minute here on how we use this operationally. So, I looked at this chart and I went, oh my God, what is that? Like, why is there one of our largest recipients is in a, is relatively low number of people in poverty? And I was able to dig into that and say, okay, so not only are there 3 housing authority sites there, but there's a couple of mass distribution sites there that serve the greater community in that area that is actually very, very low income and low resourced. And so it's not a over service of a particular area. But in other times, in other cases, we have found that we're over serving somebody and we're able to find who we're over serving, who we're underserving, and kind of make sure that we are equitably distributing food based on need.
Yeah,
Jen,
so basically you use it. Oh, go ahead.
I
Sorry.
was just say conversely, those 2 dots on the opposite side, I guess it's 1 dot per year, marking high density of poverty with lower food delivered. I think those represent areas of opportunity where we'd want to
Exactly.
expand to.
Yeah, and I could tell you those are almost certainly the same place. So
Yeah,
one
probably true.
small positive trend there. It looks like we increased a little bit to that community. As long as those are the same ones, which given that they are the exact same number of people in poverty, I would say they are, because this is 2021 people in poverty. Yeah, so that's just an example of how, those outliers should inform rather than just be ignored, right? Like, we can see that probably we tend to trend towards putting more food where more people in poverty are, more people who need it are. But those other areas shouldn't be ignored just because of that, right? So we see these, and that doesn't underserve at all. In fact, those places have a wide distribution area within themselves, and it's easily explained. And if you got rid of those, you'd probably see a much steeper trend line on both of those, which is also fine and expected. I mentioned already. Oh, go ahead.
And you can look for when if your numbers are misaligned. If you've got one slope that is extremely different than the other one, it can make you stop and analyze, was that intentional? Is it something that we want to do? Is it something that needs to be corrected? Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, if you see a big change towards that, if 2022 had a steeper slope and still toward the right, that might indicate that we're actually doing a little better than we were the previous year. And that's totally fine. Another little note about this is, like I said, that is a count of people in poverty. So that is 100% of the federal poverty line or below. If you know anything about that number, it is bad. It's based on an income, and it's based on household income and the size of a household, which is fine. But that, if you've ever seen what the conversions for that are, poverty is rough. It's very, very low. I think a better measure is actually 120%, or I'm sorry, 125% to 150%, because you will still find that you don't have to be in poverty or at poverty to be food insecure. This is just one of many measures that you can use, and an easy one to kind of.
And there's a lot of other measures out there too. This is just a sort of a demonstration. Yeah, there's things like you can look at number of people that are receiving food assistance. You can look at income, just generalized income, I believe, is in there as well. So you can pick the measures you want to use to understand what your impact is and where your areas of opportunity are.
In addition to that, if you have more features available, so let's say you have, these are by location pounds, maybe you also have the donor type. Maybe you don't really care about certain donor types, right? Or I'm sorry, recipient types. Maybe there's 1 or 2 that just don't get a lot of food. We move a lot of food to pantries. We don't move as much food to other things. So maybe you don't want to include those in the analysis. If you include those in your table, you can filter those out, and you can start to differentiate the differences in those slopes, right? Maybe those location-based things are different based on where they are. Just stuff to think about,
Yeah.
or based on where the food is coming from, where it's going.
Yeah, one of the most exciting things about data is, and I'm going to go to the next slide, but is that once you have that data assembled and in that table, you can start to slice it up different ways and think about what can I learn from this? What do I want to know? What will help me inform my planning for the next year, or my assessment of operations in the last year? And, really, once it's there, you can just do so much with it. Sean, do you want to talk about this?
I was on mute.
Sorry.
Oh, no, you're good. Yeah. So what else can you do? You can enhance the analysis that you've already done with those simple things that'll get you 80, 90, 95% of the way there, and help tell the story with a little bit more detail or a little bit more compellingly, right? In this case, I chose to use some maps. All of these things are available on the data census websites. You can get the geometric shape files is what they're called. You can work with them in a lot of different ways. There's a lot of kind of free tools out there that'll help you build these type of maps. What this is called is a choropleth map. It colors regions based on a value. And in this case, this one is zip codes by counts of people in poverty. And as you can see, this super tiny zip code has like a really high number of people in poverty. So it also probably has a decent share of people in poverty, but yeah, that's a little outside of what I'm getting into here. But you can see here a heat map of kind of, where lower income communities may be. And yeah. So tying in the data that actually comes from our system, you can see that these are the same zip codes, but where the food is actually going. And you can see there's definitely correlation, right? We saw that in the chart. We can see that a little bit in here. And that is just 2022 pounds delivered, 2 different zip codes. We also pulled in 2021 data so we can see where that changed, right? Where a heat map of the changes. So generally speaking, more food going to a place is a good thing. Less food going to a place is less good. Maybe it's fine. Maybe it was an overserved area. Maybe now we're finding that we have a newly underserved area because a nonprofit shut down. Our operations need to step up in some way. Any number of reasons, right? These are tools to show you how to better do what you do, right? Like it's so in here, you can see that that kind of area right in the center is where the biggest change is. That's also where we sent the most food. So that makes a lot of sense. I think in that one we almost doubled the amount of food delivered to that area, which makes a lot of sense. I think we got a couple new housing authority sites, and if they're there and we're taking food to them, that makes a lot of sense. So these can tie very strongly to our, what we see in the field and operationally what we're doing, and this helps tell that story. Yeah.
So then there's 2 ways really to use this data. Well, I mean, sure, there's more than 2 ways, but 2 of the sort of most significant ways are, 1, to inform your operations, which is a lot of what Sean has been talking about, to look and see how you've been doing, what your impact has been, where there are areas of opportunity, and where you maybe are just doing great. The second then is to take that and to use it to tell your story to your funders and your community partners. And so here's an example of taking something very similar to what Sean was showing, which is mapping the data of where the high need areas are and the distribution points, and then demonstrating how you have increased impact in those areas. And so, we did this GIS study and we were able to show that we were reaching more than 100,000 people within a 15-minute walk shed of food, and 13,000 of those were living below the poverty line. And we specifically targeted those areas for growth. Then we looked at areas that we weren't hitting and targeted those for growth. And we're able to show this to our funders and say, this is what your investment in 412 Food Rescue is doing. It's increasing food access to this many people in these specifically designated areas. And so it just tells a really compelling story. So it's taking that data and then, putting the words around it so that it's easily understandable without having to kind of drill down into the numbers. And you can do this with super fancy data like the GIS, but you can also do it with simple data. So, this is our annual report from one year, and you can see that showing the distinction between, how much fresh food on average nationally is donated versus when you look at food rescue, it is the difference is stark. It's 87% fresh or 80% fresh, depending on where you are. And so again, using that data to tell the story about what differentiates your organization and food rescue from other organizations in the area. And that's critical because, there's a lot of competition for funding. There's a lot of competition for attention. You want to be able to show, what your niche is, what your specific value added to the community is. And you can do that by mixing data with good storytelling. And then finally, we have a data scientist, Sean, whom we love, but not everybody has one. And he's relatively new. How long have you been with us, Sean?
A little over a year, maybe a year and 3 months, like a year and a quarter.
But we've been around and we've been using data since 2015. So you don't have to hire a data scientist. You yourself can learn to utilize these tools and use data to improve your impact and tell your story. And, you just start with the sort of simple pieces and work your way up. And as Sean was saying, the way to become a good data scientist is to start out by just poking your way around the data and making mistakes and, learning how to do things and just getting started. Even with simple tables and visuals is incredibly impactful. And then, understand that data is part of what you do, and you need it to tell your story. So hypothesize, come up with a hypothesis for why something is happening or what happened or what could happen, and then test that by running the data or collecting the data and analyzing it, and then communicate that to tell your story. Anything to add, Sean?
No, definitely just that, don't be afraid to look at stuff. It's not as bad as it seems. It never is. And there's nothing stopping you from putting in good information. You guys know what you do. Everyone here is good at what they do and understands the information around their role. So it's really just about communicating it. So finding good ways to do that is kind of the biggest step. And once you do, you're going to be leaps and bounds ahead of a lot of people. And as long as you're communicating honestly and transparently, it's okay to make mistakes, but it's fine. And yeah, there's a lot of really, really good resources for learning how to use different things. QGIS is excellent for anything geographic. There's great tutorials for both Excel and sheets out there that are all totally free. If you don't have any kind of like interactive charting, Power BI has a million good features. I know most people here are probably using PCs, so I always recommend giving it a try. It has a decent suite of ways to like slice and dice data and communicate results. And yeah, don't be afraid to just dive into the stuff that's interesting to you, and you got this.
All right, great, thank you. Before we get into questions, so we're going to take questions now if you have some. Want to just talk about our next webinar. We are doing one a lot sooner than normally we would do. We're doing it next Wednesday, February 8th. I guess that's 2 weeks from now, just to talk about the Food Donation Improvement Act that recently passed and was signed into law and what that means. So make sure if you're interested in that to sign up. With that, I'm going to
drop the chat, or the link for that in the chat,
okay.
As well as the link if you would like to book a meeting with myself or Jen in terms of getting food rescue started.
Yeah. So with that, I'm going to open it up for questions. I see one that Jake answered. Okay. What methods do you use to measure poundage you receive and deliver? So what do you mean by what methods? Do you mean how are we collecting that data?
Yeah, and first of all, I think that so in some ways, yes. Of course, we're using optimization techniques now. Are those specifically based on data? Not necessarily. Sometimes the need supersedes optimization. For example, if a nonprofit has been picking up directly from a donor for years and years, we kind of take over, manage that relationship, and rather than optimize, we want to continue their relationship. And other times, yes, we are optimizing and saying, hey, there's a closer source of food that would make it easier for a volunteer. But a lot of that is done anecdotally rather than quantitatively. Right now, I think that there are certainly ways in which we can continue to improve our optimization techniques.
We are doing a little bit of work to kind of understand the relationship that volunteers have with the food they deliver and the people around them. So there is some work currently being done on figuring out kind of like if a volunteer is likely to move to the next stage. So it's like, they made an account. Will they do a rescue? They did a rescue. Will they do a weekly rescue? And we are kind of working on that and making sure that we have a volunteer engagement person who is really proactive, and we're just trying to kind of get those heuristics out of her head and put them in a model that will help inform that, enhance what she already does extremely well.
Yeah. Hannah, I'm going to mark that as complete. Please let us know if we have not answered your question, or if you have additional questions to add on. Yeah. Jennifer, I saw you were about to say something.
Yeah, no, I'm just going to what methods do you use to measure poundage you rescue or deliver? I'm not sure whether you're asking how we collect the data. We have an app, the Food Rescue Hero app, that collects that data for it. So it's live collection. When a volunteer does a rescue, they are inputting or confirming the donation that they're picking up. And so it's super easy for us to collect that data live. In the past, before we had an app that did that, we used, text message, Facebook message, email message. It was kind of a nightmare and kind of a mess.
Also, I also want to point out that it's as easy, I think, as easy as possible for the volunteer, the donor, and the nonprofit. Yeah.
We developed the app to optimize that process because it was a nightmare. If we weren't using the app, I know some folks that aren't using an app use things like a Google form that volunteers fill out to enter that data and collect it. Again, I think data validation is incredibly important, so I wouldn't make it a free form answer. I would give them choices. So, X number of pounds of a set category, produce, dairy, rather than just saying, what did you rescue?
Yeah. Looks like you're reading. Do you want me to read the questions aloud, Jen?
Yeah, go ahead, read the next one.
We have a question. I have a hard time figuring out what to highlight in a particular data set. Do you have a list of set of questions we should highlight with data?
Sean, do you have thoughts on that before I jump in?
That one, oh, I'm reading it. Actually, no, say that one more time.
I have a hard time figuring out what to highlight in a particular data set. Do you have a list or set of questions we should highlight with data?
A lot. So it kind of depends on the specific things that you do. It always should kind of they should all be informed by what the goals and mission of your organization are. So like in our case, Food Rescue, that world is all about pounds of food moved, for better or worse. So that has to be one of our metrics. That is one that we use, and it's always one that we focus on. We also try to focus on, where is that food going? So find the kind of core thing, and then sort of branch out to the obvious questions from there. When you find those questions, before you look at the data, pose a hypothesis, like, maybe pounds are down this year, right? Why might that be? And then what would you expect to see in the data for that to bear out? If it isn't that, then it may be something else, right? So it's a lot of trying to be as methodical as possible, but it's very dependent on the specific thing you're trying to do.
Yeah, I mean, that's where I always start, and I'm not a data scientist, is like, what do I expect to see? what do I think this data is going to show me? And how will I go about finding out if that is actually what is here? And then if it is what's there, if it's showing me what I expected, then cool. I kind of know what the story is. If it's different, cool. Now I
Right.
have, more information.
Along the lines of that, I like to pay attention to the people who are truly, running the operation or on the phones. I'm listening to what they're telling me, seeing if I can pull data to substantiate that, and then drill down into the root cause of that data.
Mhm.
We've got another question from Ahana. It says, can you share data so researchers like me who are working in food rescue can learn and contribute in a meaningful way?
I will answer that. I think that Jake has sent you our email address. You can set up a time to talk with Sean and I about that. We'd love to hear what you're doing.
We work with researchers all the time,
Yep.
and we handle this case by case. But yeah, we're pretty good with it. We're responsive, and we try to give people what they need to do the research.
On this point, let me say that wherever you're doing food rescue, there may be a local university that has some researchers that are interested in working with you. A lot of our early insights came from partnering with Carnegie Mellon University and University of Pittsburgh. And so we would find researchers there, or they would approach us and would do some analysis of our data. One group did something that I thought was kind of interesting, and that was they looked at our missed rescue rate. That's the number of rescues where a volunteer doesn't claim a rescue, and compared it to weather. And it confirmed what we thought it would confirm, right? That, snow and rain drive down the number of volunteers that will go ahead and accept a rescue. But having the data that demonstrates exactly what is happening is really helpful, because it also means you can then work to address those issues, and you can test, change. You can test and see what works and what doesn't work.
I'm going to go drop down to the bottom. I know the anonymous attendee's been asking a lot of questions, so I want to get to Denise really quickly. Do you have an estimated average weight per box of items by category? For example, a box of produce is 20 pounds or et cetera, or a box of bread is about 10 pounds if we cannot actually weigh the donations.
We do, and we've done some, just some field research on this to go out and weigh like a banana box, which is what most grocers donate their produce in, and how much does a banana box of assorted produce weigh? And so you find that range, and sort of take the middle of that, and that's a good estimate. Same thing for other categories.
Yeah, we're in the process of updating those as well. But yeah, I mean, like as long as you have as long as you have a robust average, the error in either direction, kind of by definition washes out, right? So it isn't a huge problem then, as long as there's a systematic reason why these ones don't have a known weight and these ones do. So it's all things to think about. But yes, we work on heuristics like that.
Also worth noting, it's always important to ask the donor when they're donating, whether it's a weekly or a one-time rescue, what's the average pound per box that you're donating. They'll generally have a really good idea as well.
There were a couple of questions that were asked in the chat that I wanted to have Sean weigh in on, which is some verbally, the low cost or free tools we're using. Sean, do you want to just talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, definitely. So we use a number of things. If you're on PC and you're a Microsoft organization, I definitely recommend using things like Excel, using things like Power BI. If you work out of a database, that's even better. It'll query those directly. If you're a nonprofit, there's extremely cheap tiers for that to like share that data kind of at an enterprise level. But the desktop version is completely free and pretty easy to slice and dice data with, easier than I think a lot of tools out there. For mapping, there's actually some built into Power BI, but there's also things like QGIS. I think there's some free versions of ArcGIS. It's just the fancier one. I use a lot of like R and Python. So if you've got people on your team who are kind of familiar with that, it works well and is also, again, completely free. But yeah, and then obviously the Google suite of data tools. So Sheets, Forms, like when you have it's for more than just surveys, right? Like you can use that as your data entry form, things like that. Those are some of the best ones to start with. I think There's other BI platforms out there that start free as well. I think there's Mode, there's a few others. They let you have a few users and use a certain amount of data for, no cost.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Sean. I wanted to touch on the anonymous attendee. If you feel free to share where you're asking questions from or who you are, so we don't have to keep calling you anonymous attendee. Recommendations on programs that talk to one another. I would just say that is that's a complex question with a complicated answer. And that's something that I would look for somebody in your community that would be willing to donate their time to help you set up systems that integrate, because it just depends on what you're using. We have our own app that we work with. So I don't know what's out there publicly available.
Aggregators, GBT, Alteryx, those all kind of work and have, reduced cost and free tiers, all worth looking into. There's a little learning curve, but they're all pretty supportive staff, and they're mature programs that work well. Again, can't say it enough, for a low cost thing that you're running on your computer. Power BI will also let you join data pretty comfortably.
Yep. Do we base information on the households that we serve on the location of the recipient's agency location? Well, so we work with a lot of organizations that are not agencies, like not food pantries. We work with like housing authorities. Yeah, we work with a lot of non-traditional or distributors, organizations. So again, we work with a ton of housing sites, and so there we know exactly where the people live. I mean, not their apartment number, but we know they live in that community, that really discrete location. We work with a lot of places like low-income family support centers, so that when people go to pick up their kids, they can get a bag of groceries. We don't have household data on those, but they're geographically defined. So we know they're coming from within that community, maybe not that exact zip code, but that community. So that's how we understand who we're serving. We do work with some pantries as well, but a lot of times those are geographically defined as well. You go to the pantry that's in your zip code. And in terms of collecting data on the households we serve, that's a really difficult question. It is one that I know every food rescue organization deals with, because all of the organizations that we work with to distribute define it differently. They collect that data differently. And so we're getting that information from them, and it ranges from super specific. Our housing authorities have very specific data to very general drop-in centers for people who are homeless. They don't have a lot of demographic information. So, we do our best to collect as much as we can and then tell our story based on the data that we do have.
Census data is a good place to draw some inferences from. It is not going to be the answer, but it can give you an idea.
Final question. We rescue food from, I'm sorry, I should read the question out loud. Do you rescue food from retailers and directly deliver food to customers, or do you just deliver food in bulk from retailers to charities? Again, because of the nature of the organizations that we work with, some of it is going directly to people who need it in their senior high rise or their family community. We do have some partnerships where we deliver directly to households as well. Those are in partnership with other nonprofits. We do not do any determination of who we're going to deliver to.
So, yeah, and Hannah, I saw that I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. By the way, I saw that you had scheduled time on my Calendly link to talk about starting food rescue. So we can certainly talk about this in more detail during our meeting time, which I'm looking forward to. But I guess the short answer is we do food rescue in a variety of different ways. It's taken many different shapes and forms throughout the course of my duration with food rescue.
Yeah, and we leave a lot of that to the organizations
Mhm.
that are serving those communities directly. So, we work with the Housing Authority of the City of Pittsburgh, and we do a home delivery with them. We deliver directly to some of their residents. That's in partnership with them. Excuse me, sorry. But in general, we don't do that sort of process of processing requests for food. I think that is the end of our questions. Does anybody else have any more questions before we wrap this up? All right, great. Well, thank you everybody for attending today. Thank you, Sean, for talking about data with us all. And if you have any follow-up questions, you can reach out to Jake or I, and we will do our best to answer. So thank you so much, everybody.
Yeah, it was
All
good
right.
seeing you guys.
Yeah.
See you, Sean.
Later, everyone.
Stop
Bye.
recording.